Good morning. Good morning. Hey, a better looking crowd here than I've ever seen. And it's not because there are more men, it's because there are more women. Nice to have you here with us. I know we have one new person here this morning. Would you stand up and introduce yourself, please? Well, sit down and introduce yourself. That'll be fine.
I'm Roger Burgess. I'm a retired United Methodist minister and psychologist, and unaccustomed to public speaking as I am. That's who I am. And we've been here 9 days.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm a Methodist, and if you're that Methodist minister, you need to be a psychologist too in these trying times.
Yeah.
Our next speaker in December is Amy Chapman. We've always had the executive director here to speak to the men, and I wanted to get her here, and she's agreed to speak, and she's agreed to answer all the concerns and questions that we have. So I look forward to having her in December. A few people still eating back there, but we're going to get started. I think everybody's here now. Our speaker today is a resident, John Barber. Most of you have seen John's paintings. I noticed that he has been a maritime artist that everybody knows about, but he's also a cityscape artist and an architectural art artist. I didn't know that until just recently. He's also been designated as the premier chronicler of the Chesapeake Bay life, and that's a real honor to have. He's a fellow of the American Society of Marine Arts, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the National Maritime Historical Society. His paintings have been included in the State Department's paintings that were sent abroad to be shown in embassies, American artist paintings abroad. And then I noticed that the National Geographic Society said, and I don't know why, John, why they wanted to do this, but they asked you to paint a work for Ronald Reagan, which you presented, and I've seen a picture of you and the president and some other dignitaries. And to keep it all on both sides of the aisle, John was selected to paint the White House during the Clinton administration because it was the bicentennial of the White House. And so he's done the Republican and the Democratic side with his paintings there. There's so much more that I found about John, but I'm not going to do that. I'll finish this by saying he got his BFA from VCU in 1969, and he and his wife Kathy have 2 sons, and there's so much more that he has accomplished. He's still young in a short time, and John still works every day in his studio. So, but I won't say anymore. I'll let John and his painting and his art do the talking. Just welcome him. We're glad to have him here today.
Well, after that glowing introduction, I'm afraid my presentation is going to be disappointing. Let's see my glasses. Yeah, I got glasses here. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. It is nice to see the ladies and the gentlemen here. And before I begin, I'd like to introduce my wife, Kathy. Kathy, would you please stand up? She has been with me all these wonderful 55 years, and she has contributed as much to my career as I have. So thank you, Kathy. I was born nearly 77 years ago to a mother and father in Danville, Virginia. They were cotton mill workers, and we had a very low income. Some might say it was close to poverty. But like others around us at that time, I didn't realize how we stood or where we stood. I was just a little country boy growing up and doing what I could. My story has been filled with blessings and lucky breaks all along the way. My story today may sound more like a fairy tale to some, and it's sometimes even boastful, but it is what it is. I've been a full-time artist for 44 years, and I have no training in painting. From the very beginning, this is a replica of a drawing that I was told that I did as a young boy. I had never seen the ocean at that time, but I must have seen something in books or magazines that struck a nerve with me. And since that very early age, I have been compelled to go to and be a part of and to paint the sea. Of course, before coming up sea painter, I took some time as a gunslinger. My first mature memory was at age 7, when I had gone down with some family members to to Cape Hatteras, and I saw a man sitting under an umbrella painting the Hatteras Lighthouse and the Atlantic beyond. And I still remember that wonderful aroma of turpentine and oil paint blending with the salty air, and seagulls were whirling around, and I said to myself, I want to do that with my life. Well, in high school, I was doing paintings like this, and I guess it was in my junior year, I did the old lighthouse painting on the left and sold it for $500. Yeah, and that was 1962, 63. So at that point, I realized I maybe would not have to work in the cotton mill. And a huge part of my success has been due to this lady here, Lucille Walton. She was my art teacher and my guidance counselor in high school. She came to me in my junior year and said, John, what are your plans for college? And I explained that there was no college in my future. And she took me aside and coached me, and she actually helped me assemble a portfolio which was sent to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And for that, I suppose it had something to do with my talent, but primarily I suppose our economics, they provided me with a one-year fellowship to attend RPI, and that goes back a ways. Went in there in 1965. So I'm talking with Mrs. Walton, and I said, well, I really want to study painting. And she says, no, John, you can't do that. You can't study painting because you'll end up starving. You must study commercial art. I said, well, what is that? And she said, well, you'll be doing ads and brochures and annual reports and things like that. And I said to myself, that sounds absolutely horrible. That is not what I want to do with my life. But it beats being a starving artist. So I went into VCU or RPI, studying commercial art, and eventually got my degree in commercial art. During the time I was there, we had a fraternity house party down on Gwen's Island, and I arrived late and walked out on the dock, and I saw the moon rising over the Chesapeake. And I was not familiar with the Chesapeake. If I had seen it at all, it would have been passing over the bridge tunnel heading to Virginia Beach or farther down to North Carolina. But it made an impression on me. And after that time, I finished school. I took a job as a commercial artist in the corporate world. Well, I was fortunate in that I didn't like the work particularly, but I did work with some really fine people and did some traveling. And the boss of our department was a man by the name of John Nesbitt. And John was a sailor. And he had a little small sailboat when I first met him, went to work there. But then he went up north and found a beautiful wooden yawl that he bought. That's a sailboat up at Camden, Maine. Yes, and brought it back down to Virginia, and we sailed that together. So at that time, I really became enamored with the Chesapeake. So I'm still working there as an artist, a commercial artist. This is my first boat. It was a little fiberglass sea snark, and it was traded to me by a friend of ours. He lived up in the mountains and didn't need a sailboat, and we traded it to him for a piece of my artwork. Well, Kathy and I were loaned a home down in Deltaville for a weekend or a week after we were married, and I took the little boat out and learned to sail it on Sturgeon Creek. And once I had a grasp of what sailing was about, I sailed from the south side of the Rappahannock over to Windmill Point Marina, turned around, came back, and I said, this sailing thing, that's something I need to really focus on. And after a couple more years, we were earning a little bit of money, with the commercial art business. I bought this catamaran, and I sailed it all over the Rappahannock River, down around Virginia Beach and on the bay, and really enjoyed that. I'll back up a little bit. Back in that time when I was at VCU, I met Tony Puccinelli. Wonderful guy. I'm sure many of you knew Tony. Unfortunately, he passed away just recently. But a wonderful, wonderful friend. Let's see now. I've gotten ahead of my notes here, so I'll have to catch up. Yeah, so I worked for 10 years. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, here we go. That's a little boat I built. I went to Kathy and said, Kathy, I really need to build a boat. And I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I told her it would take X amount of time, cost X amount of money. And she reluctantly agreed. And we had 2 small boys at that time. Kathy was pretty much stay-at-home mom, even though she was teaching at night to make ends meet. Well, the boat ended up taking twice as long to build and cost twice as much to build it. And there toward the end, it was somewhat of a pariah. I felt like I had that big bird hanging around my neck that is spoken of in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And when I finally was able to get it finished and taken out of the yard, I named it Albatross. Well, I've been working for 10 years in the corporate world, and at that time, my corporate income was equal to 50%. I was earning 50% of my income from my art, which I was doing on weekends, and the other 50% was the corporate income. So I sat down and Kathy and I had a heart-to-heart talk, and that was, I said, I just don't think I can stand it any longer. I really want to paint pictures. And she said, okay. She said, if it doesn't work, I can go back to teaching. So she blessed me with the opportunity to leave that job after 10 years and to strike out on my own as a full-time artist. The Chesapeake Bay was my subject at that point, and I'd been doing a few paintings of the bay, and so in 1979, I had a friend of mine who was able to contribute $10,000 in making a series of prints. So we did these. We did first the 4 prints that you see on the top, and then later we did another 4. Whoops, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Another 4. And the prints were starting to sell quite well. I realized that if you sold an original, that painting was gone. But if you had your original and you made reproductions, you could sell those reproductions for much less. And in theory, it would support the value or increase the value of the original. Well, early on, because of my sailing, I was familiar with the Chesapeake Bay skipjack. These boats were purposefully built in the early 1900s to dredge oysters from the shallow waters of the Chesapeake. We still have a few of these still working out in the Maryland waters. At that time, there were probably 50 of them working. And I made an effort to go to Maryland, that's where they were, spend a lot of time working on these boats, learning the inner workings of how they worked, how they dredged oysters, and I started doing paintings of the skipjacks. And that's what I became mostly known for. So the Chesapeake had that as a subject. It also had what's called dead rise boats, which is a term actually referring to the angle of the bottom. They have a sharp entry on the bow, and back toward the stern, the boat comes almost to a flat configuration. There's a slight rise, and that's called the dead rise. That's a very unusual name to come up with a boat just based on that very slight difference. The bay also had beautiful boats. This boat here, the Muriel Eileen, is owned by friends of ours, and I've done many paintings of her. She was built back in the early 1900s, and she's kept in mint condition by a client friend up in Delaware. Actually, I may not need these notes. So the bay had much to offer as subject matter: beautiful marshes, wonderful wildlife, sea life in the way of fish, crabs, clams, really interesting lighthouses. On the left, upper left, there's Thimble Shoals. Down, the next one down is going to be Old Point Comfort. You got Thomas Point Light, which is a screw pile lighthouse there, and Cape Henry Light, which was built, in 1792. So we have a tremendous amount of history around the bay. We had beautiful harbors like Annapolis, Deltaville, St. Michael's, Maryland, and Norfolk. And what I've enjoyed quite a bit is working with the local watermen. These are hardcore individuals who get up long before light, rest their living from the sea, and are back at the dock long before sundown to get their catch in before it heats up. So yeah, I said the Chesapeake has enough very varying subject matter that I could devote my career to it. I didn't want to be a generalist and paint boats and cats and mountains, but I wanted to be a specialist. So I dedicated myself to learning as much as I could about the various aspects of the bay. And the bay has 12,000 miles of shoreline, so it's quite a bit sizable body of water. I sold my little wooden boat to put money into our business, but now we were starting to sell artwork at a regular rate, so and I was working primarily through this gallery in Annapolis called the Annapolis Marine Art Gallery. They were selling my original paintings and also my prints. And so this was the first small sailboat that I bought. It's a Cape Dory Typhoon 19, which was a wonderful little single-handed sailboat that I love sailing. There for quite a while, I would sail it every New Year's Day with a friend of mine. And as time went on, paintings would sell and the prices would get higher, and then eventually I bought this Cape Dory 30, again called Albatross. They were all called Albatross until I finally named one after Kathy more recently. And after sailing this boat for a while, I decided that I'd like to try a trawler, and this is a Grand Banks 32. So I was boating, I was painting, and by the way, this Albatross, this trawler here was my favorite studio. I could be aboard that boat for a week or more, never leave, and just paint. Go up to Urbana. We kept the boat in Deltaville. Go up to Urbana or over to Onancock, across the bay, and just wonderful time. So, yeah, in the 1980s, when I was spending more time on the skipjacks, that fact came to the attention of the National Geographic people, and they did a film on me, down that lower photograph. The two guys that came from National Geographic, and they did a film on Tillman Island on the eastern shore of Maryland, where most of the skipjacks were harbored at that time. And they aired the film on a program called National Geographic Discovery. And I think these were 30-minute pieces, and I enjoyed that. I could have put some of that into this presentation, but I'm not techie enough. And also at that time, well, just after that, 1985, the National Geographic had produced a major documentary on the Chesapeake Bay. They wanted to present their film to President Reagan, but they also wanted to give him something more tangible. So Dennis Kane, who's on the right, contacted me and asked if I would do a painting for President Reagan. And I said, of course, you don't turn down the president. So I chose the skipjack Stanley Norman, which I had sailed on quite a bit, owned by a friend of mine, Captain Ed Farley. So I did this painting of the skipjack dredging in the bay. And we presented it. I remember it was wintertime in '85, and that's President Reagan, and there's Gilbert Grosvenor, who was the president of National Geo, that's me, and Dennis Kane, he was in charge of television programming, and became a friend and a collector of my work after the fact. Well, up here on the left, you get a better view of the Reagan painting, and I was thinking if I could maybe dovetail onto that another painting, a major painting that I would do prints of. So I used the Reagan painting as a preliminary study and did a larger painting of the Stanley Norman. And at this point, the skipjacks were dwindling. There was about 36 at this point. So I call the painting The Vanishing Fleet. We created, I believe, 1,250, is that about right, Kathy? Yeah, and they were all sold before the prints were made. Excuse me. Well, things were going really well in the Barber family. So I called a client of mine, Joe Bertram. He went between Connecticut and his home down at Ocean Reef Club, Key Largo. And he's from the Bertram yacht family. So I asked him where he would suggest I take my wife and family for a really wonderful vacation. And he said, in his opinion, the Bitter End Yacht Club on Virgin Gorda in the British Virgin Islands is where I should go. So we did. We went down for Easter, and we liked it so well, we went back for a number of subsequent Easters. And of course, that's the photo. That's our son, Adam, who's out in Portland, Oregon now. That's me. Joshua, he lives with his family here in Richmond. And of course, there's Kathy. This would be typical of the paintings that I would do either while being there in the BVIs or painting in my studio after the fact. I'm going to bore you now with a lot of paintings. Up at the upper left is, that's the Trevi Fountain in Rome. And we see, and I'm painting there in that. And if you go to the right, you'll see Notre Dame, and you'll see a little painting there. These paintings that are done on location are referred to as plein air paintings, which is a French term which simply means painted in the open air. When the English company Winsor Newton started putting paint into lead tubes back in the mid-1800s, it allowed artists to leave their studios and to take these little tubes of paint out into the field. And of course we know that movement of art was called the Impressionist. And so these are paintings that were done in that manner. And there on the lower left is me in Positano on the Amalfi Coast. And then that's the Grand Teton Mountains on the right. Back in Italy here on the left, that's Lucca on the west coast, near the west coast of Italy. That's Rue Royale down in New Orleans. These are all plein air paintings. The painting on the left was the most difficult and time-consuming plein air painting. This is from Siena. This area is called the Il Campo, and the tower there was built, I can't tell when, I think maybe in the 1500s. But that painting took 5 hours. So you can imagine how many times Kathy had to come and relieve me. Excuse me, what's happening here? I must have touched something. Yes, and then on the right, that's a studio painting. I did that back in Richmond. And that's from Siena also. On the left, we have a studio painting of Venice. On the right, San Gimignano, which is just a town of towers in Tuscany. Here we have that painting of Notre Dame again. And I almost cried when we watched the Notre Dame burn, when that spire fell through the center of the cathedral. It was just heartbreaking. The painting on the right, that would be from the Latin Quarter, Saint-Germain in Paris. That painting was done in my studio from photographs after the fact. Here in Seattle, on the lower painting is from the wharf at Seattle. That was a plein air painting. And here I am painting Mount Moran on the Snake River, at a bend in the river they call the Oxbow Bend. This is a studio painting. You can never get that much detail into a plein air painting, done back in my studio in Richmond. In 1994, we opened the Barber Gallery, and Kathy took command of that, which was a blessing. She worked with our clients and she worked with our staff and did a wonderful job, which allowed me to be free to go and research. I've driven many of those thousands of miles around the Chesapeake, and I've traveled by boat on many of the rivers and creeks. Excuse me, I was away doing my work while she ran the gallery. This is an interior detail showing some of my work. We did not sell my paintings from the gallery. We were showing them there, but we would sell them later, and I'll explain that shortly. But on a daily basis, we did sell prints. We sold retail prints to people who walked in, or people who ordered them from us, and we also distributed prints. At one time, we had about 120 dealers, of course, mostly along the East Coast. Excuse me. This is one of my studios. I've had several, in our homes as well as outside. This one here was on Patterson. This was my favorite studio, which was on my trawler. And here I am sitting in Urbana Creek, working on a painting which was called Diamonds on the Water. That was a print that I did. and it will come up later again. In 1985, I did this painting, and it really shook the market. It was a very fast sellout. We did 950 prints, and it sold out very quickly. And obviously, in a limited edition you can't print extras. You just have to sell what you have. And that was such a sought after print. People, let's see, we sold it, was it $95, Kathy? Yeah, we sold it for $95, and before long, people were paying $3,500 for it. Years later, I wanted to redo that painting, but do it better. So I did this view here, a fair breeze and full moon, and I'm on the skipjack Catherine, and we have the skipjack Stanley Norman on the right there, and these boats are sailing past Thomas Point, which is the Screwpile Lighthouse offshore from Annapolis at the mouth of the South River. Most of my painting for the last 20 years, and yeah, since I left the world of reproductions and prints behind, most of my paintings have been commissioned paintings. So a gentleman by the name of Happy Hogshire from Norfolk came to me 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and he brought this photograph on the left. And he explained that back in 1953, he was working at his grandfather's sail loft in Norfolk, and they were making sails for modern yachts. And he sailed a little Hampton 19, which was a class boat. They were all built the same, and they raced competitively. And the Hampton 19 was designed by a gentleman from Hampton. He said he wanted for me to paint the scene as it appeared when he won the regatta, the national regatta, on the Lafayette River in Norfolk back in 1953. So I took the photograph. He brought me along some of the yearbooks from his yacht club, Norfolk Yacht Club. So I did two sketches. I did the one in the center, which shows a bell buoy on the Lafayette River. And I didn't like that because the bell buoy took attention away from the boats. So I did another version of the boat back on a port tack, and his boat that he was sailing, is prominent there in the center. Well, this was a major painting, and when I do a major painting, I want to do a small study, which would be about 4 by 8 inches. You see on the left there. That gives the client a very good idea of what their major painting is going to look like. It gives them assurance, and it gives me assurance that I'm on the right track. And then I did the larger painting. And when Happy Hogshire died, they asked me if I would mind their displaying the painting at his wake, I guess you'd call it, at the Norfolk Yacht Club. So Kathy and I were there, and we were honored to be there. I said earlier, we didn't sell the paintings from our gallery for a couple of reasons. Number one, I just didn't want to deal with it. And when you're doing prints, reproductions, limited edition prints, you're driven by the dealers always wanting more and more inventory. So when I did a print, and it would sell quickly, they would be on my back to do more prints. So I just did not want to deal with selling originals, so we would just hold them off. And we came up with the notion that we should just have a one-night sale at the Commonwealth Club in Richmond. And we had 4 different sales there. They took place every 3 years. I think the last one was, about every 3 or 4 years. So we would rent the room for one night. We had an auctioneer. We had a number of auctioneers, but Mark Motley was our last auctioneer, and he did a wonderful job. We would price the paintings fairly, and then I would announce them, and then Mark would auction them, and many of them went for 10 times the asking price. And I'm going to run through a few paintings here. I did a number of historical pieces. This is Annapolis, back in about 1900. And all of these boats are actual boats that I found in the archives, either in St. Michael's or at the another library there in Annapolis, or either the Congress, Library of Congress. So we see this steamer coming into the dock there in Annapolis. This is Old Town Alexandria, 1885. This particular bark here was left Alexandria on a particular day and sailed down to South America to mine and bring back guano. Guano was the excrement from bats and seabirds, and it was extremely rich in nitrogen, so they'd bring it back for fertilizer. Many of those boats exploded, burned, because when the nitrogen would mix with seawater, it would become unstable. So someone walking down with a pipe or whatever into the hold of the boat, it could ignite the fumes and the ship would burn. This is mooring arrival at Baltimore. This particular boat here was bringing Carrara marble from Italy, and it was used for architectural use as well as funerary use for gravestones. Old Norfolk Evening, late 1800s. This is a ferry dock. I can't really remember. I think Portsmouth is in the background, and I think we are like standing above the harbor there in Norfolk. I guess it's maybe where that waterside project is now. This is an early scene from the eastern shore, Onancock, which we love to sail over to. Just love that town. I love old boat yards and old boats. And this is a railway which goes back hundreds of years on Dimer Creek, owned by the Weininger family. And this was a typical dead rise boat here. And it was rigged at this point for dredging oysters. And it could be used for crabbing or clamming as well. Another old boat, this would be on the eastern shore, called a Day of Rest. If you look in the, hanging over the transom of the boat are the handles for oyster tongs. The head of the tongs is up in the, behind the bulkhead there. Another old boat. A lot of these old boats were simply drug up into the marsh and let die after their useful life was over. Skipjack sailing out of a little harbor on the eastern shore. I wanted to do something from the air, so I borrowed these. I borrowed some mounts from Gary Maynard, who was, some of you may know, was a friend of ours. This is one of the most popular prints I did for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has a classic Concordia sailing yawl in the foreground. And in the background is the Tides Inn on Carter's Creek, and we see their yacht, Miss Anne. She was a 120-foot steel motor yacht, which was there for many years at the Tides Inn, and she would take the guests out for afternoon cruises. Oops. And on Saturday, that particular boat would come over to Urbana. Reason is, the Tides Inn was located in Lancaster County, which was dry. Urbana had a liquor store. So they would bring the guest over on Saturday. Ladies would go shopping. The crew would go to the liquor store and stock up on their bottles to take back, and they would lock them up in the lockers for the guest. Well, the boat that you see here on the right was owned by friends of ours, David and Christy Cottrell. And that was the boat that was on the railway just a few images ago when I said she was rigged for clamming and oystering. And David bought her for nearly nothing, but put, I think, $500,000 into her. And he turned her into a pleasure yacht for himself and his family. Unfortunately, when the Regatta Point Railway was it Dozier's Marina on Urbana. When it burned about 8 years ago, that boat was burned as well. It was, I think they lost about 20 boats, and 2 lives were lost in that fire. So this was called the last whiskey run because they sold Miss Anne. They sold Miss Anne to another group after that. Oh, by the way, it's hard to see, but in the center of that painting on the shore is a home. It looks something like a lighthouse. David and Christy Cottrell had that home built, and they built it. It was fashioned after a small model of a lighthouse that they found up on the St. Lawrence Waterway. They gave this little replica, like I say, of a lighthouse to an architect, and they designed this beautiful home, which is sitting there still on the shore of Urbana Creek. I can't remember when I did this, but it was probably late 80s. I went down to Lockley's Creek, which is on the Rappahannock River on the Grays Point side, and I was looking for a legitimate working oysterman, because I knew a lot of oysters were caught in that area. There was not a single oysterman left on Lockley's Creek or the other creeks nearby due to overharvesting and disease. But I wanted to do this painting, and I went out on I went out on someone's lawn here and made some photos of the bridge. So I had it in my mind to do a painting it's called hand togging oysters by the bridge. So when our boys came home for Thanksgiving from college, I rigged up some sawhorses in the driveway, and I made photographs of them and then repositioned them on this make-believe boat, which is typical Dead Rise boat, and named it Two Brothers. All right, well, I had met Walter, Kathy and I met Walter in the late 80s, I believe, when he presented to me an award. I think it was the Isaac Walton League up in Washington. And he told me at that time that he was familiar with my work because he would sail through the Chesapeake twice a year. He normally kept his boat in the summer on Martha's Vineyard, and then in the winter he would go down to the British Virgins. So he saw my work as he was sailing through the bay. So I said to him that evening, I said, if you ever want your boat painted, you could reach me. So eventually he did call the gallery, and one of our ladies there at the gallery thought he was me pulling her leg, but it was actually Walter. So we got together, and he said, the boat's coming up early May, mid-May, and would you like to jump aboard in Annapolis? And of course I did. I said, absolutely. So Walter and I joined the boat. It was brought up by his captain and crew. We jumped aboard the boat in Annapolis, and she was a 60-foot ketch built by Camper and Nicholson in England. And she was a magnificent boat. So we sailed up to Martha's Vineyard through the East River. We spent some time there in New York at the, can't remember the name of the marina, but Walter and his wife came back with one of their daughters. Then we sailed out to Martha's Vineyard. And the afternoon, we'd been sailing for a couple of days in the fog, pea soup fog. And the afternoon we sailed into Edgartown. The fog broke like this, and it just made an impression on me. And that's the painting that I did of Walter's boat. She was called Winty, which is a Dutch term. He's Dutch. He was Dutch. So that's the Edgartown Yacht Club in the background. It was just a wonderful experience. Kathy flew up the day after we arrived by boat. Kathy flew up, and we stayed there at his house for another 5 days. Wonderful experience. And here's a photo of Kathy and Walter at their house on the upper right. And they invited us, Walter invited us, the painting is there on the left. I shipped the painting up to him. And he invited us to their Christmas party in 1999. So, I forgot to tell you something, sorry. As we were sailing up the coast from Annapolis, I was on watch, I think between 12 and 4 or 12 to 6 a.m. as we're sailing up the New Jersey coast. And we passed Atlantic City, and of course, you're on a sailboat, it goes forever and ever and ever. And I was struck by the Trump Casino there. I'd heard about Trump Casino, didn't know anything about the guy. But his name was on the building twice. So the next morning, I'm up on deck drinking coffee. Walter comes up, and I said, "Walter, you should have been here, several hours ago. We passed Atlantic City, and I saw that new Trump Casino." He said, "Thanks, John. I needed that." He said, "Excuse me." So he went below and picked up his phone, and he made a telephone call. And he's talking with someone, and his voice gets louder and louder, and he's more and more agitated. And he said, "Donald, I'm telling you, if your building goes higher than 40 floors, you're going to make an awful lot of enemies in our building complex." Walter and Betsy lived in, I think it was called the UN Towers. There were 2 residential buildings very near the UN building. And he said, "We've had this conversation with you many times, and you'll make a lot of enemies. Now tell me, can you keep that building to 40 floors?" And apparently Donald said, "Yes, I can." He says, "Well, now I'm going to get back and report to our building president, and we're going to hold you to it." And then apparently Donald said something, and Walter slammed his little flip phone like he was hanging up on him and said, "That lying son of a bitch." So he comes up on deck, and I think maybe the captain said, "Walter, what's up?" And he said, "That damn Trump, building a building across the street from us, and if it goes up higher, it's going to block our view." And these folks obviously paid huge amounts of money for these apartments, and they had a wonderful view of the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building. And so we go to the Christmas party, and I asked Walter, after meeting a few notables up there, like Andy Rooney and those other newscasters, I asked Walter what was going on with the building, and he took me over to the corner and opened up the drapes, and he said, "Take a look at that. That's the 40 floors." Now, that building totally blocked their view, that beautiful view they had. This is the World Trump Tower. It's topped out at 72 floors. Now, interesting though, all the elevator panels in that building show 90 floors. They're actually 72 floors. You think this might have been a mistake by the elevator company? Not a chance. Not a chance. So here I am with the lovely First Lady Hillary. They had the bicentennial of the White House, and so they chose an artist from each of the 13 original colonies, and I was selected for Virginia. And this view is painted from the top floor or the deck of the Hay Adams Hotel, which is just across Lafayette Park from the White House. This is the North Portico, of course. I had to throw in Bruce Hornsby. That was just a thrill meeting him. We went to a promotional thing down at the Norfolk Norfolk Opera, and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation wanted to present it with one of my prints. And this other here, on the right here, this is Gary Jobson. He's known as Mr. America's Cup racing. He was on Ted Turner's crew when he won in whatever the boat's called, can't remember. And he's presenting to me this Distinguished Service Award that John mentioned. And I'm sure they had a mix-up or lost mail or something, because I should not have been given that, because others who received it were people such as Gary Jobson, Walter Cronkite, Bill Baker, who was the longtime president of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Sir Peter Knox Johnson, I think is his name. He was the first man to ever solo around the world nonstop on a sailboat. So I think somebody really good just didn't show up, and they gave it to me. Up here on the left, we were invited to Surgeon General Everett Koop's 90th birthday at the Army-Navy Club. And I was asked to do a painting of the Eagle, Coast Guard training ship Eagle. And the city of Norfolk asked me to do that for their tall ship parade. So the lady asked me if I'd like to meet the Commandant of the Coast Guard to show him the study. And I jumped at that, drove up and met with Admiral Papp, and he made some suggestions. And while there, he asked me if I wanted to sail on the Eagle. Wonderful opportunity. The boat was coming down. This was in the fall of the year, prior to the tall ships. The boat was coming down from Connecticut, coming down to the mouth of the bay and going up to Baltimore for repainting. So he said, when she comes down in a couple of months, I will have them stop at Annapolis and pick you up. So they did, in fact. They anchored the Eagle in the Severn River, and several of us from the Navy, from the Naval Academy, jumped aboard a tender, and we were taken out, and we sailed up to Norfolk. And I got wonderful photographs, which helped tremendously with this painting. And this shows the Eagle sailing into the harbor there with the Susan Constant, which was the lead ship of the Jamestown group, and behind are the other tall ships. And we have the New York here on the right. I believe that's the ship New York, and they had many tons of the steel from the Twin Towers in that boat. And the other boat, the other ship there, I think it's the Enterprise. I think that was our first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Back in 2014, let's see. Well, there was a wonderful little museum down in Deltaville that burned in 2012. So they had a fundraiser and they rebuilt the museum, and we arranged to have a retrospective of my Chesapeake paintings to open the new building in 2014. So we arranged to have 50 of my paintings to be borrowed back from around the country to hang there in that museum for several months. And this is the new museum that opened with the show. Down below is a photo of the gallery with all the artwork there. And Ted and Mary Linhart were the sponsoring patrons of the event, and there they are receiving one of my palettes, one of my painting palettes from me. So we go on and I do more paintings, and this is typical of the harbor scenes that I might do. We did limited edition painting, prints of this one, of course. So many of my paintings are commissioned paintings. This was a very nice lady who wanted her new Tiara, which was the maker of the boat, painted. Beautiful little cruising yacht. She wanted the boat painted. We can see her at the wheel on the boat. She wanted her prior sailboat, which is ahead of the powerboat, and she also wanted her condo, which is over the starboard quarter of the boat. We owned one of those condos for quite a while also. This is a painting that goes back a number of years. This is a Fishing Bay Yacht Club race. That buoy is out in the bay, and that would be the windward mark, and these guys are rounding it in a race. There's Norwood Davis. Some of you may remember Norwood. He's leading the race with his J-boat, J-44 Margarita. Following behind would be Brett Halsey in the white sailboat, and the black sailboat would be Jimmy Rogers. Brett Halsey passed away recently. This is a painting I've always been fond of called Diamonds on the Water. This is a Bermuda 40 yawl, just a beautiful boat sailing into Urbana Harbor. John Cogill, who was a friend of ours, he wanted his son in the painting, he wanted his son's boat, their dog, Bella. He wanted his Grady white, and he wanted his house, which is the one in the sun, and his wife and his daughter on the dock. So that's a pretty full package right there. And I just love painting skipjacks, and you're a couple that are off Thomas Point, beautiful lighthouse up near Annapolis. This is the twilight finish. Every Wednesday night during the season, the Annapolis Yacht Club has a race, and they finish the race. They go out into the Severn River, and they finish the race right there in front of the yacht club. I did this painting 15 years ago, I guess. Well, I think about 8 or 10 years ago, the yacht club burned, and it burned this painting. This painting was hanging in the main room there, so this painting was lost. So they asked me if I would repaint it, which I did, and our son out in Oregon suggested I take some ashes from the old yacht club building and mix it into the paint, which I did. And I was at the yacht club recently, and they have a placard there telling that part of the story about the ashes, which I thought was very cool. Another client, that's the Muriel Eileen, the Chesapeake Bay boat, built early 1900s. This fellow's got a whole flotilla of boats. He's got a little crisscross runabout. That is that Trumpy yacht there. That's his. It was his father's. It's his now. And the Bay boat in the background is the Nellie Crockett. She originally came up from Deltaville. I get asked to paint all sorts of things. This is friends out in Hanover County. We see their prize riding horse and the owners there. And if you look in the shade there, you'll see his prized 1957 Chevrolet with the fins on it. Again, I get asked to paint lots of things. This is a converted lobster boat. This couple loved fishing, and they would leave their home in Santa Barbara, California, and they would go off to the Channel Islands and fish. And here they are heading back home at the end of the day. I don't know how our time's going. Am I going way over?
Yeah, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay, I'll speed on through. Red Sky at Night, beautiful boat built in 1937-38 up in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, owned by a friend of ours, Tom Martin, who owns Legend Brewery. Schooner, I've sailed on that schooner. We raced from Baltimore down to Portsmouth. I painted it again in the Rappahannock River, and that's the Rappahannock River Bridge. I was asked to do the World War II memorial in Washington, and the challenge here was I had to do the painting before the monument was finished. So I was working with the sculptor and the architects using their drawings to do this painting 6 months before it was finished. And we had canvas prints made from this, and donors who had given $1 million and more each got a canvas print. Here's a Richmond scene. I know John mentioned Richmond. Here's my wife. I used my wife and my son Joshua as models. You can see them on the right by the tobacco company. This is just one of my favorite paintings of the skipjack. This is the painting that's here. This is the way, 40 years ago when I first started going to Tillman Island, this is the way it looked. It's totally different now. This is a local guy named Kingsbury Bay. He wanted his home up in Maryland painted, and every toy he owns is in that painting. Summerwood, it's called. His brother, not quite so gregarious, simply wanted his house painted, which is there on the South River. And the Puccinelli Lake House. This is Tony and Sandy's beautiful place up on Smith Mountain Lake. They were invited up last summer, and I made these photos and did this painting for them. Pat Alders, I'm sure most of you know Pat, lovely lady, a resident here, and her late husband Fritz gave her a caboose. I guess he ran out of the normal things, and then he bought a railway, the Great Smoky Mountain Railway, to hook it to. Quickly, we're coming to the conclusion. I met a really nice couple called Pat and Bill Garner down in Annapolis, down in Deltaville. They were aboard their motor yacht heading for Florida, and they asked me if I would paint 2 of their boats, and I said yes. And while having that conversation in Deltaville, they said, "You may know my daughter." I said, "Who is that?" She said, "Jennifer Garner." And I said, "Doesn't sound familiar." And then he said, "Well, she's in a movie." And I said, "I don't go to many movies." "Well, she's in an ad for Bank of America or something. I don't watch a lot of TV." So I was really embarrassed when I told Kathy and some other ladies about it. They said, "That was Jennifer Garner's parents." So anyway, I did the painting for them, and that's Jennifer and her parents, Bill and Pat, and the painting hanging over their fireplace out in Charleston, West Virginia. And I got a really nice note from Jennifer. I don't normally do portraits, but I had to paint our granddaughter, Emily. Very sweet girl. You may have seen her around here with us sometimes. And this is our beautiful family down in Deltaville 2 years ago. Adam and his family, Portland, and Josh and his family here in Richmond. And there's little Emily in the striped dress. And you got to believe that the Chesapeake is not all work for me. Occasionally I go fishing, and occasionally I get lucky. That's a beautiful rockfish, which were plentiful. Rockfish this size were plentiful in the bay a number of years ago after the moratorium. They're not so plentiful now. The fish, this brown fish down here in the lower left, is a cobia. It's a wonderful fish. That was 85 pounds, which was, I think, the largest cobia caught in Virginia that year. We caught it off Windmill Point. And that is the presentation. And if we have time, I'll be happy to answer any questions, or anyone can come up and take a look at the painting. I'm not sure how we should continue.
We're over time, but we've got time for questions. And any of you have questions, we're going to keep going here. I'll come around with the mic. If you have a question, raise your hand. Anybody have a question? Nobody has a question. Anybody want to buy a painting?
I guess I answered all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.